The East has some pretty extreme history, but European history is interesting for sure.
There's something about white males where they're more inclined to take a risk. That's like you have Asians tend to have higher IQs than whites, but you have all these inventions. You have all these inventions coming from whites, despite not being the smartest ones. And I think it's a combination of like gumption and grit and risk taking, and it just leads to more inventions. Well,
I think it was. I know that you probably know.
Chinese
E. Michael Jones, for instance, right?
Yeah.
Well, E. Michael Jones has a hypothesis about this, which is kind of interesting. So, white cultures themselves are kind of young, right? They're actually kind of young. The European nations were basically all barbarians, and that's what the Romans called them, barbarians, because they went blah blah blah, right? That's why they called them barbarians. Yeah, that's why the Romans and the Greeks called them barbarians. Blah blah blah. That's what they thought they sounded like. Thought they sounded like idiots, and they lived in forests, the European forests, basically. Yeah. Once there was a move through to kind of culture the barbarians, they had all this natural resource around them. Massive forests. Some of these trees were, you never find anything like it. Again, all of Europe was a giant forest. So they had huge industry. They were able to kind of move into huge industry because they had a lot of resources. And so kind of the Jones hypothesis on this is Africans are way behind because they didn't have all of this access to resource for industry. There's just really nothing there in sub-Saharan Africa. Whereas in Europe, when the barbarian tribes which were there get domesticated, they had tons and tons of resources, and so they became very inventive.
But isn't the whole hypothesis about race and IQ that people in Africa had it easier? So they didn't have to survive, whereas whites had to survive the Siberian winters, and they got better at systems because they had to like pickle things and plan for the winter and insulate a home and have firewood for the winter months, but no one else really had to plan that far ahead.
So that's, if we're looking from kind of a purely evolutionary lens, which is what you're kind of looking at. Not really. That wouldn't really be the hypothesis because they also weren't getting run down by lions and tigers, and they also weren't, having nearly as much trouble.
Well, blacks can run fast.
So because of whites, right? But yes, Africa had all sorts of conditions that they were dealing with there that were every bit as bad as the conditions dealt with by these northern tribes, right? Same thing. They had all sorts of bad conditions, but they didn't have nearly as much in the way of naturalized resources which were useful. They had those things that nobody cared about then, right? If you're tribal, like gold and diamonds and rubies, right? Nobody gave a fuck about those things.
Those are rocks.
Yeah, those are dumb glittery rocks. We can't eat that. You know what I mean?
Well, why do you? Because I don't think it's arguable that whites are, especially males, are exceptionally good at systems. And why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's because Christianity.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I agree with the Jones hypothesis that. So, well, the interesting thing about Christianity is you can take this kind of cross ethnos. You can say, yeah, the Scottish are a lot like the Irish. They're not Irish. And they're not English. And the English and the Scottish and the Irish have fought a lot of wars against each other.
Yeah.
They've done it tons and tons and tons.
600 years.
Yeah, but they have this great unification, right, that happened throughout all of Europe called Christianity. And there was a synergistic relationship between the church and the state. Well, the church itself, it had churches that it was the head of in all of these different countries, in England and in France. And it was all the Catholic Church, one church under one head. So it was really easy to communicate between these different nations for diplomacy, things like this. So systems gradually expanded from that.
Viking law, the Thing. The public gathering of land-owning freemen, known as the Thing, assembly, was the cornerstone of democracy and authority in the Viking Age. Each district had its own thing, and as a rule, these open-air assemblies met once or twice a year, although they could be convened more frequently. The basic function of the thing was to provide an arena where matters of local importance could be debated. Considering the Viking woman's standing in society, it is surprising to discover that although she was entitled to attend the thing, she was denied the right to vote. Above the district assemblies was a regional thing, where the more important decisions taken by the districts would be ratified. When a man brought his grievance to the thing, the matter would be considered by the whole assembly, who were then required to reach a unanimous verdict. Once this had been pronounced, it was then incumbent on the winning suitor to seek his own redress, as the thing was not empowered to enforce its decisions. To defy such a verdict, however, was deemed dishonorable and could have serious consequences, possibly leading to a man being declared an outlaw. If a plaintiff's grievance involved family honor or revenge for a killing, he could demand that the matter be settled by single combat, which was fought out in front of the gathered assembly. The Vikings obviously found this form of government effective enough and exported it to many of their colonies overseas. By the end of the 11th century, however, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden were each dominated by a single, powerful monarch, and the authority of the thing diminished accordingly.